Some parts of being a spy I could handle. The outfit Val was wearing was not inconspicuous. She had on a long, flowy dress kind of thing that
Hello
covered
there,
her
and
from
welcome
chin
to the
to
golf
wrist
club.
to floor,
Feels
similar
good
to a
today.
sari,
The air
but
feels
with more
good.
coverage.
Nice
It had
weather. Let's play some
scarf-like
golf.
pieces that cascaded around her, obscuring the shape of her body. It looked like something straight off an avant-garde runway, and probably was. It was memorable, but from behind, all you could see about her body was that she was tall. She wore a thick, dark wig with corkscrew curls that jutted out wildly in every direction. It, too, called attention at the same time that it obscured the shape of her head and covered parts of her face. With the wide-framed black sunglasses she held in her hand, she would be well hidden. "Shall we?" Val asked. Alex took a deep breath and nodded. Alex parked Val's tacky green Jaguar at a meter on the hill overlooking a large, dingy gray concrete office block. Val had insisted on the green car, a gift from another admirer, naturally. It was the one, she said, that she wouldn't miss if she had to submerge it in a lake. From this angle, Alex could see the entrance to the underground parking garage. It was kind of sad, actually, that Karsten had never moved to a better office. Maybe he liked the depressing surroundings. Maybe it seemed appropriate to the job, and he liked things to conform. Making things easier for Alex had probably not been on his agenda, but it was nice it had worked out this way. She and Val sat in the Jag for more than an hour, Val getting out to feed the meter once. They didn't talk. Alex's mind was miles away, working overtime to think through the flaws in her plan and try to fix them insofar as that was possible.
Nice. Should be in the fairway.
There was so much that had to be left up to chance. She hated chance. Alex imagined Val's mind was in Beijing.
And
it was a good place to run to.
135
Val
yards
might
out
even
from
be
here.
safe there. Alex wished she and Daniel were getting on a plane to Beijing right now. Daniel probably wasn't enjoying the wait any more than she was. He'd be at the park now, nothing to fill his time until Alex arrived, no way to know what was happening. At least she had Val to sit with, even if neither of them was very good company at the moment. Finally, there was movement below, and she sat up straighter. The white and red striped arm at the mouth of the garage was rising to let someone out. The last two alarms had both been delivery trucks, but this time, a dark sedan was pulling out of the garage. Alex started the engine and rolled out onto the street. Someone honked behind her, but she didn't spare him a glance. She didn't take her eyes off the car. From this distance, it appeared to match Karsten's black BMW. It was only just after
Solid
4 o'clock
swing.
now, not quite time for government employees to be heading out. Here was the first big chance. Once Erin Karsten Boyd was sure her daughter was missing, she would have called her father in a panic, right? She knew he had some kind of important government job. She would consider him powerful and capable. She wouldn't rely on just the police with her daughter kidnapped. Should it have taken this long? When Alex had last been able to check, no call had come and Karsten was still in his office, managing Kevin's interrogation, no doubt. She thought he would head to his daughter's side. It seemed the only response. But what if Karsten had other options? What if he sent a special ops team instead? Was he that cold? If he had to be, probably yes. But surely Devers could manage the interrogation by himself for a few hours, right? Alex's driving was much more offensive than defensive as she weaved her way forward, refusing to stop for even the pinkest of yellow lights. She knew the two best routes from Karsten's office to the zoo, where she assumed Erin's call had come from. Would the terrified mother leave the last place she'd seen her daughter before she was positive the child wasn't hiding somewhere in the foliage? If the call came from a police station, of which there were several possible options, Karsten could take a number of different routes. So many things left to chance. The BMW was heading down the correct street, the one she would have chosen as the quickest route to the zoo. He was driving a little erratically as well. She carefully moved up from behind 2 other cars. She didn't want to spook him. It was the right car. The plates matched. It looked like the back of Karsten's mostly bald head. Alex watched for eyes in the rearview mirror, but he seemed to be focused on the road. She maneuvered into the parallel lane. She supposed she should feel better that this part was going according to plan. but it felt like someone was drilling a wide hole into the bottom of her stomach. She thought she might gag as she pulled alongside his car. Because if this part worked, that meant she had to go forward with the rest of the plan. The light turned yellow ahead. Cars streamed through, but Karsten was slowing. He knew he was too far back to make it. The car in front of him braked too. Alex could have pulled up to the line in her lane. The car in front of her had turned right.
Up 30 feet from
Instead,
the hole, so
she
have fun with
stopped
this.
directly beside Karsten. She waved, her face pointed straight toward his profile. The motion was deliberately large, meant to catch his peripheral vision. Karsten glanced over automatically at the movement, his mind clearly far away, worry making a crinkled mess of his forehead. It took him a second to realize what he was seeing. In that instant of shock, before he could smash down the accelerator, pull a gun, or dial a number, she held up the phone in her hand. She had the image zoomed in on the girl's sleeping face. He locked down his expression as the facts began falling into place. Quickly, she hopped out of her car and reached for the passenger door of his. She didn't look back to watch Val slide over into the driver's seat, but she heard the door close behind her. Alex waited with her fingers on the BMW's passenger door handle until she heard the locks click open. She climbed in next to him. The whole wordless exchange had taken less than 2 seconds. The cars behind them might be curious, but they would probably forget the transfer by the next light. Turn left, she told Karsten, as Val went right and headed east. The Jag disappeared around the corner. Karsten was quick to recover. He put on his blinker and pulled across the left lane, nearly hitting the van headed through the light. Alex took his phone out of the cup holder, powered it down, and shoved it in her pocket. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice sounded calm, but she could hear the strain in his lack of inflection. "I need your help." He took a moment to digest that. "Turn right at the next corner." He complied carefully. "Who is your partner?" "Someone for hire. Not your concern." "I really believed you were dead this time."
And it looks like
Alex
we have about
didn't
135 yards
"What have you done to
to
Livy?"
go.
"Nothing permanent. Yet." "She's only 3. His voice quavered uncharacteristically. She turned to give him an incredulous look, which was wasted, as he never glanced away from the road in front of them. "Really? You expect me to care about civilians at this point?" "She's done nothing to you." "What did 3 innocent people in Texas do to you, Karsten?" "Never mind," she said, when he opened his mouth to answer. That was obviously rhetorical. "What do you want from me?" "Kevin Beach." There was another long pause as he rearranged things in his mind. "You're going to turn left at the next block,"
we're putting
she instructed.
from about 28 feet
"How
out.
did you—" He shook his head. "I don't have him. The CIA does." "I know who has him, and I know Devers is following your direction in his interrogation," she bluffed. "Your specialist is the one leading the case. I'm sure you know where they're working on him." He stared stone-faced through the windshield. "I don't understand what is happening," he muttered. "Let's talk about what you do understand, then," Alex said in a bleak voice. "Of course, you remember a little concoction Barnaby and I created for you called Deadline." His pasty skin started to mottle, blotches of puce blooming on his cheeks and neck. She held her phone out, and his eyes flickered to it automatically. The photo was back to its original size now, and the IV hooked into his granddaughter's arm was conspicuously in the foreground. There was a saline bag, the nutrition bag, and a smaller, dark green bag attached underneath it. He stared at the photo for one long second, then his eyes were back on the road. "How long?" he asked through his teeth. "I was generous. 12 hours. 1 hour has passed. This operation shouldn't take more than 4 at most. Then Livy is delivered safely back to her mother, no worse for wear." "And I'm dead?" "I'll be honest, the odds aren't good that either of us make it through unscathed. A lot is riding on your acting abilities, Karsten. Lucky for you, we both know how convincing you can be." "What happens if, through no fault of mine, you die?" "Bad luck for Livy. And her mother, for that matter. Things have been set in motion. If you care about your family, you'll do your very, very best to get me out alive. You could be bluffing. You were never this cold-blooded.
Well,
Policies
you're on the green.
change. People
Huge
change.
putt coming up. But...
Shall I share a secret? She gave him a moment to respond, but he just stared straight ahead with his jaw locked. Kevin Beach wasn't in Texas when Devers sent the kill squad. I was. She let those two words hang in the air for a moment before she went on. Karsten wasn't the only one with acting abilities. I'm not the person you used to know, Karsten. You'd be surprised at the things I'm capable of now. Take the next right. I don't know what you hope to accomplish here. Let's get down to it, Alex said. Where is Kevin? Karsten didn't hesitate. He's in a facility west of the city. It used to be a CIA interrogation suite,
that hole
they haven't
puts
used it
you
in
up
years.
to even
Officially,
par.
it's abandoned. The address? He listed it from memory without a pause. What kind of security? He glanced over, his eyes studying her for a second before he responded. I don't have that information, but knowing Devers, it's more than is necessary. He'll go overboard. He's terrified of Kevin Beach. That's why he came up with the whole charade with the brother. No risk. That's what he called it. Karsten chuckled once. It was a bitter sound, in no way amused. Does he know my face?
There.
Karsten's eyes jerked to her in surprise. You're going in? Will he recognize me? She demanded. How much of my file did he see? Did you show him the footage from the metro? Karsten pursed his lips. We agreed from the beginning to keep our situations separate. It was need to know. Years ago, he would have had access to your old recruitment file, your write-ups from a few interrogations. He might still have those, but nothing more current. The only picture in that old file was from your mother's funeral. You were very young. Your hair was longer and darker. He paused, seeming lost in thought. Devers isn't a detail guy. I doubt he'd be able to link you to the picture. You don't look that much like 19-year-old Juliana Fortis anymore. She hoped he was right. It's more than my life on the line, she reminded him. I'm aware. And that much is a bet I'd take. But I don't know what you think you're going to do when you get inside. We, Karsten. We. And probably we go down in a hail of bullets. And Livy pays? That's not acceptable, he growled. Then give me more to work with. He took a deep breath, and she glanced over at him. He looked exhausted. How about this? She suggested. She was going on intuition. She listened to Karsten's aggravation with that one particular him in the phone calls, and she thought she could guess who it was.
One for Birdie.
After all, it was Devers' plan that had failed so spectacularly over and over. Would it be accurate to characterize you as unhappy with Devers' management of this joint operation? He grunted. Have you and Devers disagreed on how to proceed? You could say that. Does he think that you trust him to handle the interrogation of Kevin Beach? No. At this point, I would say he does not believe that I trust him to zip up his own fly correctly. Tell me about your interrogation specialist. Karsten made a sour face. Not mine. He's Devers' lackey, and he's an imbecile. I told Devers that someone like Beach was going to die before he talked to an ordinary interrogator. You can rest easy if that's your concern. They won't break him. Beach hasn't said anything about you except that he killed you. I don't think they even followed up on that. To be fair, I believed it too. She was surprised.
And that'll keep
so you never replaced
at
me.
Even par. Nice.
Karsten shook his head. I've tried. I wasn't lying about that in the beginning, you remember?
Ball on its way.
True talent is a limited commodity. He quoted himself and sighed. Devers has had a stranglehold on the department for years now, ever since I lost a dangerous asset. The CIA has blocked my recruitment process and shut down all but the lab. The things we're producing now could be created by any halfway decent pharmacist. He shook his head. They act as if they aren't the reason why you're dangerous in the first place. You still pretend you weren't part of that decision? If I had been, I'm being punished for it now. Karsten stared morosely through the windshield. Would Devers be shocked to learn that you were developing talent on the side?
135 yards out from here.
Karsten was always quick. He pursed his lips and nodded as he talked it through. For about half a second, then he'll just be angry. He's 100% on board with the current program, but he knows my doubts have been increasing. No, he won't be that surprised. You don't like how Pace gets things done? He seems like a pragmatic person. I thought you'd get along. So you did put it together. I thought you might. But I'll bet you never would have, if Pace hadn't overreacted in the first place. Machiavellianism doesn't bother me. Stupidity does. Mistakes happen, but Pace has a penchant for compounding one error with a second that's worse, and then a third. He's put us all in this mess. What are you saying, Karsten? That we're on the same side? Everybody makes mistakes, like you said, but you shouldn't rely on my gullibility again. I don't expect you to believe me, but it is what it is. I have nothing to gain from the current agenda. If Pace succeeds, Devers' star will rise. He'll end up director of the CIA. My life's work is already being dismantled. We're more on the same side than you know. If it makes you happy to say so, it doesn't change the plan.
Nice.
We go in together, he mused. You're my secret protege.
Okay,
I insist
one under for the
that
round.
you take over for Devers' butcher. It can work up to that point. I don't know what you think happens
solid birdie
then.
on that last hole.
She tried to hide her flinch when Karsten said the word butcher. So much depended on how much was left of Kevin. We'll see, she said, working to keep her voice smooth. No, don't tell me. That's smart. Just as long as you have a plan. She didn't answer. Her plan wasn't strong enough. Just out of curiosity, she asked, trying to distract Karsten from her reaction. When did Dominic Haugen die? 2 weeks after the lab in Jammu was destroyed. She nodded. Then it was as she'd suspected. Barnaby had seen something and begun his preparations. I have an idea, Karsten volunteered. This should be good. How do you feel about faking some injuries? A sling, maybe. We had a situation in Turkey 9 days ago. Got some good information from a quick-thinking corporal. Exactly the kind of person I would have been interested in recruiting, but the situation went dark. The corporal didn't survive the hostile forces' rescue attempt, but maybe the information was actually acquired by my secret side project who did make it out alive. She stared at him. He held a hand up, as if in surrender. Okay, we don't have to do it my way. It was just an idea. Devers knows the story. It would make my bringing you in feel anchored, less spur of the moment. I think I can manage some injuries, Alex said dryly. They'd gone over the story a few times before they reached the rendezvous point, and he described the interrogation room in detail. It wasn't a pretty picture, and she felt their chances for survival getting more bleak. Karsten pulled into the lot attached to the small municipal park and stopped the Beamer next to the only other car in the lot, as directed. It gave Alex a start, even though she was expecting it, to see the big blonde man waiting on the park bench. This was the first test,
for the round.
and if Daniel didn't pass, she was pulling the plug. Karsten had surely seen the photos of Daniel on the news, no matter how separate he and Devers had kept their operations. She watched Karsten from the corner of her eye, assessing his reaction. His face was a blank. "Who's this?" he asked. "Your new aide." "Is that necessary?" "Cut the engine." Daniel got up and walked quickly toward them. Alex watched Karsten for any change in expression as Daniel approached. "I can't watch you every second, Karsten," she said
Great
sweetly.
contact. Nice
Pop
swing.
the trunk. She and Karsten waited in silence as Daniel moved the gear from the back of the sedan into the BMW's cargo space. When he was done, he stood beside Karsten's door,
175
waiting.
yards to
"Get
the
out,"
pin.
Alex said. Slowly, always keeping his hands in view, Karsten opened the door and stepped out. As Alex got out, she saw the way he was eyeing Daniel. She tried to appraise Daniel impartially. He was a large man and looked able to handle himself, even with the glasses and the extra paunch. It made sense under these circumstances that Karsten would be cautious and probably frightened, though he hid it well. As instructed, Daniel said nothing. He met Alex's eyes only briefly and kept his expression neutral.
Great
His
contact.
jaw jutted out just a bit, the way it had when he'd intimidated the drunk boys in Oklahoma City. It made him look dangerous, but also slightly more like Kevin. Had Karsten seen photos of Kevin?
Okay, about an 18-footer
Daniel
here.
stopped beside the driver's door, his arms loose at his sides, ready. Hands on the roof, Alex ordered Karsten. Don't move until I get back. Karsten assumed the position of a suspect braced against a police car. He kept his head down, but Alex could tell he was examining what he could see of Daniel in the window's reflection. There was no sign of recognition, but Alex couldn't be sure if Karsten was hiding his response. Alex was distracted by the way the parking lights glinted off their bald heads in the same spots. "This is Mr. Thomas," she told Karsten. "If you try to give me away, or escape, or hurt me, you'll be dead in approximately 2.5 seconds. A bead of sweat was forming at Karsten's temple. If he was faking that, she was truly impressed. "I'm not going to do anything to endanger Livy,"
That was nice.
he snapped. "Good. I'll be right back. I'm going to go give myself some
3 under
injuries."
for the round.
Daniel's bright blue eyes flickered to her when she said the word injuries. He forced them back to Karsten.
And we have the 9th hole coming up.
All her things were neatly stowed in the cargo hold of the BMW. She unzipped the first aid duffel bag and rummaged around quickly till she found what she needed, then cut off a short section of gauze and tape. She grabbed her handbag and turned away, leaving the trunk open. The public restroom was just on the other side of the little playground. She walked quickly to the ladies' room and turned on the lights. There was no counter, and nothing had been cleaned in days, maybe weeks, so she kept the bag on her shoulder. She used the gritty powdered soap to scrub off Val's lovely makeup job. It was better this way. The makeup was out of character, and the patch of fake skin would have been a red flag to anyone who looked closely. Her bruises and bandages would draw attention, obviously, but they would also make her less recognizable. People would be less likely to examine the face underneath. She was happy to see the remnants of her black eyes, the yellow shape of the lingering bruise on her cheek. The glue job on her jaw was too amateur, but a normal person would keep it bandaged regardless. There were no towels, just a broken air dryer. She used her t-shirt to dry her face, then taped the gauze to her jaw and ear, taking the extra seconds to do the job right, so it looked like a doctor had done it. Her black t-shirt and thick leggings worked. Comfortable clothes were part of the job, and the lab coat in the trunk would give her the professional appearance she wanted. As she walked back to the car in the encroaching darkness, she could hear Karsten trying to engage Daniel, but Daniel was staring down at the man with his lips tightly closed. Alex retrieved the lab coat from the trunk and put it on, then ran her palms down the front of it to smooth out the folds. When she was satisfied, she shut the trunk and opened the back door.
For the bird.
"At ease, Lowell," she told Karsten. He straightened up warily. "You'll ride with me in the back. Mr. Thomas will drive." "Taciturn fellow," Karsten commented as he ducked in through the open door. "He's not here to entertain you. He's here to keep you in line." Alex shut the door behind him, then walked around the car to climb in the other side. Karsten stared at her. "Your face. That's very realistic work, Jules. Subtle. It doesn't look like you're wearing any makeup at all now." "I've developed many new skills, and the name is Dr. Jordan Reed. Please direct Mr. Thomas to our destination. When we're 5 minutes out, you get your phone back." Her eyes met Daniel's in the mirror. He gave one tiny shake of his head.
Nicely
Karsten
done
hadn't
with
said
the
anything to make Daniel
cut,
think he'd been
sitting
recognized
at
during the
4
time they
under
were
for the
alone.
round.
Daniel started the engine. Karsten gave him the address and a short set of directions.
Let's let her rip.
Daniel nodded once. Karsten turned to Alex and asked, "I assume someone is with Livy now?" "Assumptions are never a safe bet. You know that." "If I do my best, Jules, if I do everything I can," Karsten began. His voice was suddenly raw. "Please, please let Livy go. Make the call, whatever you have to do, even if you're not getting out. I know you have every reason to hurt me, but please, not the baby." He was only whispering by the end. She rather thought he was speaking from the heart, as much as he had one. "I can't do anything for her if I don't make it out. I'm sorry, Karsten. I wish I could have done things differently, but I didn't have the time or the resources. He clenched his hands in his lap and stared at them.
All right, you're looking at around 175-yard shot here.
She didn't answer. He probably could guess what that meant.
If we go down,
he said, his voice stronger.
At least take that bastard Devers with us. Can you do that?
I'll make a point of it.
We're 5 minutes out, approximately.
Okay, here. Alex handed Karsten his phone. He turned it on, then, after a second, selected a number from his address book. The phone rang twice over the car speaker.
Why are you interrupting me?
A man answered. His voice was pitched to be
Solid
quiet,
swing.
almost a whisper, but Alex could hear that it was a deep baritone. He sounded annoyed. Karsten was annoyed too.
I'm assuming there's been no progress. I don't have time for this.
None of us have time for this, Karsten snapped.
Enough is enough. I'll be at the gate in 2 minutes. Make sure they're expecting me and my assistants. What?
Devers started, but Karsten hung up. Combative, Alex commented.
It's our normal form of interaction.
I hope so.
I'll do my part, Jules. If Livy weren't involved, I think I would actually enjoy this. I'm so tired of that pompous fool.
The building they pulled up to would have looked abandoned if there weren't 2 cars parked beside the entrance. The small lot was protected by steep, man-made hills that surrounded it on 3 sides, the unassuming one-story concrete building
11.
taking up the 4th. The front of the building wasn't visible until you were already in the lot. The location was hidden in the middle of miles of warehouses and Soviet block-style office buildings, all certainly owned by some arm of the government and all seemingly empty. As was the maze of roads weaving through them. She doubted anyone would wander back here by accident, and she was glad she'd had Karsten to guide them through the maze. She hoped Daniel had paid attention. She'd tried to memorize the route, but it was unlikely she'd be there to guide him back out. There were no lights in the small shaded windows, but that was expected. The ground floor was nothing but camouflage. Karsten got out and came around to hold the car door for her, already acting his role. She almost smiled, remembering what it had been like when she had been the talent. Well, that was her part to play tonight. She would have to get into character. Daniel pulled the steel toolbox on rollers out of the trunk and brought it around to her. Someone was probably already watching, though she couldn't see where the cameras were hidden. "Careful with that," she admonished in a stern tone, taking the handle from him. She straightened her left cuff and brushed an imaginary speck of dust off her sleeve. Daniel went to stand just behind Karsten's right shoulder. She noticed the gold pinky ring. It didn't quite fit the picture, but the rest of him did. Even in the dark lot, his black suit looked just right. Conservative, not expensive. Every FBI agent in the country had something exactly like it in his or her closet. No badge, but then anyone working as an aide to this department wouldn't be expected to carry identification. It wasn't a badge kind of organization. She squared her shoulders and faced the dark building, trying to come to terms with the fact that she'd probably never see this ugly parking lot again. Chapter 30.
This way, Dr. Reed,
Karsten said, and he led them to a blank gray door. Daniel stayed close on his heels, his back to Alex. She walked briskly behind them, struggling to keep up with her shorter legs. Karsten didn't knock on the door. He merely stood directly in front of it, expectant, like he'd already rung the bell. The door opened a second after Karsten planted himself. The man who answered it wore a suit not unlike Daniel's, though this man's was so new it still had a sheen on it. He was shorter than Daniel and wider through the shoulders. There was an obvious bulge under his left arm.
4 under for the round.
Sir,
the man said, and saluted Karsten. His hair was high and tight, and she guessed he'd feel more at home in a uniform, but his appearance was still part of the camouflage. The uniforms would be downstairs.
At ease. I need to see Devers immediately. Yes, sir. He informed us you'd be arriving. This way.
The soldier turned abruptly and paced inside. She followed Daniel into a drab office space, gray carpet, a few tight cubicles, some uncomfortable-looking chairs. The door closed behind her with a solid-sounding thud and an ominous click. No doubt someone was still watching.
Ugh.
She couldn't afford a glance
we
back
are very
to look at the
deep
lock.
in the rough.
She would have to hope it was meant to keep people out and not in. It hadn't taken the soldier long to open the door to them. The soldier turned sharply down a dim hallway, took them past several darkened rooms with open doors, then stopped at the very end. There was a door there labeled Janitorial Supplies. He reached into his left sleeve and pulled out a spiral cord with a key. He unlocked the door and led the way inside. The room was dimly lit by an emergency exit sign over another door opposite the first. Mops and buckets lined the wall, presumably for show. The soldier opened the emergency door, revealing a featureless metal-lined box, an elevator. She'd known to expect this. She hoped Daniel was controlling his expressions. They joined the soldier in the elevator. When she turned to face the doors, she saw that there were only 2 buttons. He pressed the bottom one, and she felt the descent begin immediately. She couldn't be sure, but it felt like at least
pretty
3
deep
floors.
Stuff here.
Not entirely necessary,
give it a good hack. Let's
definitely
put it in the right
disconcerting.
direction.
Though this building had not been used for the same kind of interrogations she had conducted, it would still be part of the routine to make the subject feel alarmed and isolated. It worked. She felt an increase in both. The elevator came to an abrupt halt, and the doors opened on a brightly lit anteroom. It looked like an airport security post, only much less crowded and more colorless. There were 2 more men, these in dark blue army uniforms, and a standard metal detector with a short counter, and even the little plastic trays for belt buckles and car keys. The uniforms made Alex think these must be Pace's men. The surveillance cameras were very obvious in this room. Karsten moved forward, impatient and sure of himself. He put his phone in the tray and a handful of change. Then he stalked through the square frame. Daniel moved quickly behind him, putting the car keys in another tray, then retrieving Karsten's belongings and handing them back to him before reclaiming the keys for himself. Alex wheeled the steel toolbox to the side of the detector. "I'm afraid you'll have to search that by hand," she said, as she walked through the frame. "I have a lot of metal tools. Please be careful. Some of my things are breakable and some are pressurized." The 2 soldiers looked at each other, obviously uncertain. They looked at her damaged face, then at her toolbox. The taller one knelt down to open the top compartment, while the shorter one stared at her face again.
All right, 12-footer here.
"Please be careful," she repeated. "Those syringes are delicate." The short soldier watched now as the tall soldier lifted the top tray of syringes, only to find an identical tray below it. He carefully replaced it, not checking the 2 trays beneath. He opened the second compartment, then looked up quickly at his companion, then at Karsten. "Sir, we aren't supposed to let weapons past this point."
Good putt. Well done.
"Of course I'll need my scalpels," Alex said, letting some irritation bleed into her tone. "I'm not here to play Scrabble." The soldiers looked at her again,
okay, it's time to send this ball on its way.
Understanding beginning to dawn in their eyes. "Yes," she wanted to say. "I'm that kind of guest." They might have read the words in her expression. The tall one straightened up. "We're going to have to get authorization for this." He turned on his heel and strode through the metal double doors behind them. Karsten huffed out a big, exasperated breath and folded his arms across his chest. Alex schooled her expression into one of impatience. Daniel stood very still by Karsten's right shoulder, his face blank. He was doing well. No one had paid him any attention at all so far. To the soldiers, he was just one of those anonymous briefcase holders, which was exactly what she'd hoped for. Val was right thus far. They would have paid much more attention to her. It was only a few minutes before the doors opened again. The tall soldier was back with 2 other men. It was easy to tell which was Devers. He was smaller and more gaunt than the voice had suggested, but he moved with an obvious authority. He didn't watch to see where the other men walked. He expected them to move around him. He wore a well-cut black suit, several pay grades in price and style above what Daniel and the door guard were wearing. His hair was steel gray, but still thick. From his lack of formality, Alex guessed the man behind Devers was the interrogator. He was dressed in a rumpled t-shirt and black pants that looked like scrubs. His lank brown hair was greasy and disheveled. There were substantial bags under his bloodshot eyes. Though he'd obviously had a long day, there was fire in those eyes as he focused on her lab coat, then her toolbox, the scalpel tray still exposed.
"What is this, Karsten?"
he blustered. Neither Karsten nor Devers looked at him. Their eyes were focused on each other.
"What do you think you're doing?"
Devers asked in an even voice.
"I'm not going to let that hack kill the subject when I have a better option."
Devers looked at her for the first time. She tried to project calm, but she felt her heart racing as he examined her, his eyes lingering on the damage to her face. He turned back to Karsten.
"And where did you suddenly get this better option?"
At least he hadn't recognized her immediately, and he hadn't looked at Daniel.
Okay, 14th
The two men were focused on each other again, antagonism running between them like an electric current.
"I've been developing alternatives to save the program. This alternative has already proven herself more than capable." "Proven how?"
Karsten's chin moved up an inch.
"Uldere."
The current seemed to break on that word. Devers took an unconscious step back and blew out an annoyed breath.
Looks like this is a beauty.
He looked at Alex's injuries again, then at his adversary.
"I should have known there was more going on in Turkey. Karsten, this is beyond your authority. I'm currently being underutilized, just trying to make myself more valuable."
Devers pursed his lips and glanced back at her again.
"She's good?"
"You'll see," Karsten promised.
"But I'm at a critical point," the interrogator protested. "You can't pull me off the case now."
Karsten gave him a withering glance.
"Shut up, Lindauer. You're out of your league." "All right,"
Devers said sourly.
"Let's see if your better option can get us what we need."
The room was as Karsten had described. Plain, concrete walls, plain, concrete floor. One door, a large one-way mirror between this and the observation room, a round overhead light flush with the ceiling. At one time, there would have been a desk in this room, two chairs, and a very bright desk lamp.
For the round.
Subjects would have been questioned, harangued, threatened, and pressured. But that would have been the extent of it.
Let's let her rip.
Now, a surgical table took the place of the desk. It was like something from a World War I movie, one solid piece of unpadded stainless steel with the kind of wheels a gurney had. There was a folding chair in the corner. This facility was nowhere near as functional as the state-of-the-art suites back at the department, but clearly, this interrogation was off even the most covert section's records. She kept her inspection clinical and prayed that Daniel would have the restraint necessary for this. Daniel had accompanied Karsten and the others into the observation room, and he was invisible to her behind the glass.
Club here.
Before the group divided, neither Devers nor any of the others had looked at his face. She desperately hoped he would do nothing now to change their indifference to suspicion. Kevin lay on the table under the one light, handcuffed and shackled in place. He was naked, his body gleaming wet with sweat and blood. Long burns blistered a multitude of uneven parallel lines down his chest. Thin slices ran up his ribs, ragged skin blanched at the edges, probably with acid. The soles of his feet were covered in blisters and bleached white as well. Lindauer had poured acid into those burns. Kevin was missing another toe on his left foot, the one next to the first stump. Lindauer's tools littered the floor, messy with blood and his dirty handprints. She knew there was a toe down there too, but she couldn't find it at first glance. She'd expected a clean, clinical setup.
So we have about 165 yards to go still.
This was savagery. Her nose wrinkled in disgust. Kevin was alert. He watched her as she walked in behind the interrogator, his face tightly controlled. With a precision meant to mock Lindauer's unprofessional work habits, she bent to her toolbox and carefully laid out a few of her syringe trays.
"What's this?"
Kevin asked hoarsely. She glanced up automatically to see that he was addressing the mirror, not her.
"You think a little girl can break me? I thought this flunky was the low. Honestly, you guys never cease to disappoint.
Lindauer, who had insisted on being in the room, leaned furiously over the table. He jammed one finger into a slash wound that cut across a burn on Kevin's chest. Kevin grunted and clenched his jaw.
Don't worry, Mr. Beach. The little girl is just a nice rest period for you. Get your strength back. I'll return later, and then we'll have some productive conversations.
All right, you're on the green. Good stuff.
Enough,
10-footer
Doctor,
here. This is makeable.
Alex snapped in a ringing tone. I agreed to let you observe, but you will kindly step away from my subject now. Lindauer glanced at the mirror as if expecting backup. When he got only silence in response, he frowned sullenly and went to sit in the lone chair. Once he was down, he seemed to collapse a little, whether from exhaustion or disgrace, she couldn't tell. Alex turned her back on Lindauer and pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves. The small piece of metal she'd palmed in the process was invisible beneath the right glove. She stepped to the edge of the table, gingerly clearing a swath in Lindauer's mess with one foot. Hello, Mr. Beach. How are you feeling?
Good to go a few more rounds, sweetheart. Looks like somebody already had a nice time with you, huh? Hope it was fun for him.
While he spit the words through his teeth, she began examining him, shining a small flashlight in his eyes and then assessing the veins in his arms and hands. A little dehydrated, I think, she said. She looked directly at the mirror while she put his right hand back on the table, leaving the thin key under his palm. I assumed there would be an IV in place. Could I get a pole, please? I have my own saline and needles.
I'll bet you know your way around a pole,
Kevin said. No need to be crass, Mr. Beach. Now that I'm here, things will be much more civilized. I do apologize for the current conditions. This is all very unprofessional. She sniffed scornfully, giving Lindauer her most cutting side-eye. He looked away.
Honey, if this is the good cop routine, sorry, but you're not really my type.
I assure you, Mr. Beach, I am not the good cop. I am a specialist, and I should warn you now, I won't play the same silly games this interrogator. The desire to use a less flattering word was clear in her inflection. Has wasted your time with. We'll get down to business immediately.
Yeah, sugar. Let's get down to business. That's what I'm talking about.
Kevin tried to keep his voice loud and his tone derisive, but she could see the effort it was costing him. The door opened behind her. She watched in the mirror as the tall soldier brought in an IV pole. So far, she'd seen only 4 others besides Devers and Lindauer, but there were probably more hidden from view. Just put that at the head of the table, thank you, she said without turning to look at him.
Doesn't look like his own fairway, but that's all right.
She'd bent to retrieve the syringe she wanted.
You gonna dance for me now?
Kevin muttered. She looked at Kevin coldly as she straightened. This will be just a sample of what we'll be doing tonight, she told him as she circled the table. She placed the syringe by his head while she hung the saline bag and the tubing. The door closed, but she didn't look away from Kevin. She examined his veins again, then chose his left arm. He didn't resist. While she carefully inserted the needle, she tried to spy the key she'd given him, but it was nowhere in sight. She picked up the largest blade she could see on the floor and laid it next to his right arm. You see, I don't need such crude weapons. I have something better.
We're in the rough, but we're close to the green,
I always think it's fairer to let the subject
safe,
understand what he's up against before I go full strength. Let me know what you think.
I'll tell you what I think, you...
Kevin launched into an avalanche of profanity that put all his previous creative descriptions to shame. The man had a talent. I appreciate your bravery, really I do, Alex said when he was done. She held the point of the syringe against the IV port. But please know, it's a wasted effort. Playtime is over. She stabbed the needle through the plastic and depressed the plunger.
Okay.
The response was nearly immediate. She heard his breathing accelerate, and then he started shrieking.
Okay, 17th hole.
Lindauer's head
snapped
up.
Shot.
She could tell he'd never gotten a reaction like this from Kevin, despite his best efforts. She heard movement behind the glass as the audience edged closer, and the faint murmur of voices. She thought she could pick out a surprised tone, and it was gratifying, though honestly it was all due to Kevin's acting. She knew how he would be feeling now, as the strength raced through his veins and all the pain vanished. She'd used more than double the highest dose of Survive she'd ever used on herself, taking into account his greater mass and need. His screams were primal, almost triumphant. She hoped she was the only one to notice that nuance, and that he'd remember that the damage done to his body was still very real, whether he felt it any longer or not. She waited only 5 minutes, tapping her foot and watching him dispassionately, while he did his part, keeping his screams loud and constant. She wanted him to have as much time with the drugs in his system as possible. When they wore off, he would be incapacitated. "There, Mr. Beach," she said, as she shot ordinary saline into the IV line. She gave him the cue he would need. "I think we understand each other now, so I can let this end. Shall we talk?" Kevin took longer to recover than he should have, but then he didn't know her drugs.
For the round.
He pretended to come out of it slowly, and she was glad Daniel was standing close to Karsten with the venom-coated ring ready. Only Karsten would recognize the fraud. Kevin was still breathing heavily after a minute, and he actually had tears streaming down the sides of his face. It was easy for her to forget he was an undercover professional, because she'd never seen him in the field. But she should have known he would nail this performance. "Well, Mr. Beach, what now? Shall we continue to full strength, or would you like to talk first?" He turned to stare at her, his eyes wide with convincing fear.
"Who are you?"
he whispered. "A specialist, as I told you. I believe the gentleman,"
okay, looks like you have around 155
with a nod toward
yards
Lindauer,
to go.
"had some questions for you."
"If I talk,"
he said, still in a whisper,
"do you go away?"
"Of course, Mr. Beach. I am merely a means to an end. Once you have satisfied my employers, you will never have to see me again." Lindauer was openly gaping now, but Alex was worried. They had to keep moving forward, but at the same time, would anyone believe Kevin could fold so easily? Kevin moaned and closed his eyes.
"They won't believe me,"
he said. She wasn't sure how, but she thought his right handcuff was no longer locked to his wrist. There was just the tiniest misalignment of the two halves of the bracelet. She didn't think anyone could see it but her. "I'll believe you, if you tell me the truth. Just tell me what you want to say."
"I did have help, but I can't."
She took his hand in hers, as if she were soothing him. She felt the key drop into her palm. "You can tell me, but please don't try to buy time. I have little patience." She patted his hand, then walked around his head to examine the IV line.
"No,"
he mumbled weakly.
"I won't."
"All right then," she said.
Okay,
"What do you want to tell
here.
me?"
This is definitely
She
makeable.
dropped her hand onto his left, inserting the key between his fingers.
"I had help from a traitor on the inside."
"What?" Lindauer gasped out loud. She shot him a dirty look, then turned to the mirror. "Your man is unable to control himself. I want him removed from this room," she said severely. An electronic crackle sounded through the room. She glanced up for the speaker, but couldn't find it.
"Continue,"
Deaver's disembodied voice commanded.
"He will be escorted out if there's any more misconduct."
She frowned at her own reflection,